Hello and welcome to Bringing History to Life. Today we're talking about the iconic and ill-fated Titanic. Now we all know the basic story. The ship in 1912 leaves on its maiden voyage, crashes into an iceberg, sinks and loses over 1,500 lives. Now that story has been told over and over again and we know it well, including popular movies. What you might not know is that the Titanic wasn't designed as a luxury ship. It was designed as an immigrant transport, a transport to bring immigrants from Europe to the burgeoning economies in Canada and the United States. Now, on the top decks, certainly there were very wealthy people who traveled, but they were like the influencers of marketing today. If people saw the rich and famous sailing on a ship, it must mean it was a pretty good ship and they should buy tickets too. There's some things you might not know though about the Titanic. One is because it was built to carry immigrants, it had a huge capacity for passengers. And in fact, when it leaves in 1912 heading for the United States, it is 1,000 passengers short. That is that those tickets simply weren't sold. The Titanic was on a tight schedule. Had to be in New York, was the pride of the White Star Line. They weren't going to miss the sailing date, so they left 1,000 passengers short. So just imagine the cost in human life if those passengers had been on board. Secondly, many people believe there were no Canadians on board the Titanic when she sailed. In fact, there were 130. But the reason we think there weren't is those people were carried on the manifest, on the passenger list, as British subjects. So they weren't defined as Canadian, but they were. And so the Canadians were sailing, 130 of them, back home to Canada in the most part. And one of those people that sailed was a major with the Queen's Own Rifles, a storied regiment in Ontario and in Canada. The Queen's Own Rifles Major Arthur Peuchen. Peuchen was not only a major in the Queen's Own, but he was also a famed yachtsman in Canada, owning his own 65-foot yacht, and he was the president of the Standard Chemical Company. Now, Peuchen had been in Europe for the company and was returning to Canada. When the Titanic hit the iceberg, Peuchen left his cabin and went down to see what was going on. He was so confident of the safety of the Titanic that he left $200,000 in cash and bonds in his safe in his stateroom. But as soon as he saw the damage, he knew there was no going back. So Peuchen started to help as best he could. As he went across the decks, he looked down and saw a lifeboat being lowered with mostly women aboard. He was concerned that there weren't enough men to row the heavy boat away from the ship as it was sinking. He pointed this out to a crew member who said, "If you are so good and you're such a great sailor, why don't you get in the rowboat and help?" Well, he skimmied down a line about 60 feet down a rope into the lifeboat. Even as he was pulling away and rowing, he realized he'd made a huge mistake. He had left the deck of the Titanic. This is something in 1912 that no gentleman nor officer would do. And so he worried about his reputation even as the Titanic was sinking. As soon as they were rescued by the Carpathia, another ship in the area, Peuchen grabbed a scrap of paper, wrote out an affidavit that said, "I was ordered off the deck of the Titanic by a crew member." And then he went around looking for every Titanic crew member he could find to sign the document, because he knew his reputation was at risk. Now Peuchen returned to his job and to his position as a major with the Queen's Own. But his reputation did suffer. Soon the yellow newspapers, the sort of national enquirers of the day, would take on his case and make him out to be a full-blown coward. Some even suggested he might have dressed as a woman to get off the ship. None of that was true, of course, but in 1912 Toronto society, it was a heavy burden to bear. Peuchen would continue to live his life, retiring from the company, from the Standard Chemical Company, and he would continue serving with the Queen's Own Rifles, but it was never going to be the same. He was no longer the bon vivant, the man about town that he'd been before the sinking. So, the Titanic still gives up its secrets, as it tells us all of these things about what it was like to live in 1912. Thank you very much. We'll see you soon.